Roger Suzanne here checking in from the first alert desk. And unfortunately, although a year has passed since that conflict began, it is only getting more violent and deadly on both sides. Just this morning, 2 women were hit by shrapnel as they were commemorating the dead victims in a prayer service near Tel Aviv. Palestinians fired off at least 4 rockets towards that area. Luckily, we're told the victims are expected to survive, and in fact, that prayer service continued even as those bombs exploded around it. Now, that violence comes just hours after 3 people were killed overnight in Gaza. The Israeli military hit a refugee camp there, along with a makeshift hospital. 11 people were also injured. Those victims, we're told, include children and journalists. Israeli leaders say the attacks were meant to prevent Hamas from launching a wider-scale attack. We'll track the latest developments, of course, on air and online. Live at the First Alert Desk, I'm Roger Suzanne. Caitlin, I'll send it to you.
All right, Roger.